Did you ever wonder why a prestigious university that can easily fill all their classrooms with really top-notch, wealthy students who can pay their way will go out of its way to get underprivileged, unpaying students in their college? You think about that? I mean, that, and they all do it. They say that what they're doing is building bridges. Okay, and here's an example of one.
A CBS News New York Times poll out tonight finds most Americans believe race relations in this country are bad. More than half of whites think so, and more than 2/3 of blacks. Even more troubling, 40% of blacks and whites believe race relations are getting worse. And this may be one reason our poll found big majorities, 60% of whites and 71% of blacks, believe most Americans are uncomfortable discussing race with someone of another race. Tonight, Elaine Quijano tells us about a group that is helping blacks and whites break down the racial wall by breaking bread together.
It starts out like any other dinner party.
Thank you. That's great.
But then a difficult conversation begins.
Blacks don't trust white people by and large.
I didn't have any black friends. I mean, a couple of acquaintances. I never had them in our home, never been in their homes.
They call themselves Chattanooga Connected, a group of blacks and whites who meet once a month to have dinner and talk openly about race.
Then we are different.
Yeah, but when I first came to the group, I was a little skeptical at first.
I grew up in a very white neighborhood.
We are segregated by every facet of our lives.
They didn't want to have anything to do with me. She married a black man.
They were brought together by 75-year-old Franklin McCallie, a son of privilege whose family name is seen everywhere in this town. He says he was raised to believe in the South's segregationist order.
Did you used to use the N-word?
I've used the N-word, and I told some in-jokes. They were less. They lived in less homes. They got off the street. They said sir to me as a young man.
But in college, a conversation with a student from a nearby African-American school changed everything.
He said, "You know where we eat lunch? My uncles and I, who fought in World War II for freedom and justice and pursuit of happiness, we get on a bus and we ride 2 miles out of town to eat lunch because none of the stores we shop in will let us eat."
Does it ever get uncomfortable, these discussions here?
I think it's liberating because it was so freeing for the first time in my life to have a black man tell me what it really felt like to be walking around in a grocery store or a mini mart and have the owner of the mini mart following him around up and down the aisles because he didn't trust him. I had never thought about that.
How does something like this even begin to chip away at some of the other barriers that African Americans face?
If it all stops at this house, it won't do that much more. It's got to go other places.
Finally seeing people by talking face to face. Elaine Quijano, CBS News, Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Please welcome Franklin McCallie, one of our panelists. He's a Rotarian.
Party boy is at the Chattanooga Choo-Choo. Track 29, for you can give me shine. I can afford to board a Chattanooga choo-choo. I got my fare and just a trifle to spare.
Okay, now, another question. Do you ever wonder why Rotary keeps saying that a club's membership should mirror its community? They say that all the time. We all know it's easier to keep a club that's where everybody's pretty much the same. That's what most of us do. We got similar people, and when we go out and look for new members, we find more people that are just like us. Well, so attracting and engaging members that are different can be a huge challenge. But the Memphis Rotary Club tackled this problem head on, very deliberately with a program to help the black community by addressing the incarceration of young black men. It's a serious problem. And with a few contacts, they approached the black community in Memphis. This is in northwest Shelby County, where the black area is. And they found that nearly every church and community center was already working on this problem. Undaunted, they said, well, how can we help? And that started a successful partnership. This effort is called the Rotary Family Youth Initiative, or Rotary FYI for short, and you're going to hear more about it. But it ties into and supports so many community organizations together that it's really, really a complicated thing to describe. Together, these groups are taking action to make lasting change by addressing the childhood trauma that's the root of the problem. That's what they see. It starts with delinquency that comes from childhood trauma. And so it's not a single bridge that they're building in Memphis. It's really a lot of bridges between a lot of organizations where Rotary is helping to make this work. So I want you to welcome our panelists from Memphis. That's the Reverend Charlie Caswell from the Rotary Club of Northwest Shelby County, and Rotarian Gray Carter from the Rotary Club of Memphis.
Put on my blue suede shoes and boarded the plane. Touchdown in the land of the Delta Blues, in the middle of the pouring rain. W.C. Handy, won't you look down over me? Yeah, I got a first class ticket, but I'm as blue as a boy can be. Then I'm walking in Memphis, just walking with my feet 10 feet off a beam.
You like the other one better. Okay, our moderator today is Laquita Stribling, and you've all seen her a couple of times. She's the district governor-elect for District 6760 in West Tennessee. She's a tireless proponent of diversity and inclusion, and she's moderated several panels like this. She's been building bridges in Nashville, and she's the architect of the bridge we're building here today. So please welcome Laquita Stribling from the Rotary Club of Nashville.
You're about to set up here. All right, thank you. Well, thank you all first of all, for being here today. When we began having the conversation about having this conversation at this conference, we weren't sure what the attendance would be. So it's very exciting to see all of your beautiful faces sitting here today. Thank you, Jim, so much for that kind introduction. I appreciate that. He has certainly been a great support, taking the lead on a lot of making what you will experience today happen, and I appreciate him so much for that. And then you gentlemen, thank you so much for agreeing to participate in this discussion. I'll begin with the disclaimer that diversity is a lot of things, not just race. And we only have 1 hour, so we won't solve all the world's problems here today. So I want to make sure I tell you that. So here's the format. I have some questions I will ask them, and we'll go through having them share regarding those questions. At the same time, if you think of questions you'd like to have asked, then you have an index card on the center of your table, and then Jim and Wilson will collect those cards, and we'll leave time at the end to ask questions. But this is a heavy topic. It can be a very uncomfortable topic. We recognize that. And so we will handle it with care, but sometimes you got to get a little comfortable with being uncomfortable if progress is really to be made. So I hope that you will find this will be time well spent, because we have some great stories to share on this podium here today. So for a frame of reference, I'd like for each of you to start with telling us a little bit about your childhood and your upbringing, your family situation. So whoever would like to begin.
Well, I'll start it, and I'll try to be brief. I'm Franklin McCallie. I was born with 3 privileges immediately. I'm white male, and my name's McCallie in Chattanooga. My grandfather, my great uncle, founded McCallie School. My great grandfather was the minister of the First Presbyterian Church, a young minister, 25 years old during the Civil War, and hadn't made a name for himself. He didn't want the war either way. He didn't want the South to secede. He didn't want the North to come down and get the South. Everybody said, "Which side you on?" He said, "I don't want war." So he made a name for himself immediately. His 2 sons founded McCallie. The girl in the family said, in 1905, you're obviously going to make it a co-ed school. They said, obviously, we're not going to make it a co-ed school. She said, I'll found a girls' school then. She and her cousin and another friend founded GPS. So Girls Preparatory School and GPS. I was raised on that campus. It was a wonderful life. I was racist. I was racist because I didn't know anything else about black people. I had a maid. I loved Lucille. She raised me. She spanked me. She fed me. But she was Lucille. And she was an older woman, and I called her Lucille. And I didn't see her as, I don't know exactly how I saw her. I was like every other white. Blacks didn't really matter. I was raised on the Civil War. I did the Confederate flag. I went up and saw a monument up at the top of the ridge, and I said, Dad, it's Ohio up there. I was 8 years old. It's Ohio. He said, that's right. I said, why isn't it Tennessee? He said, because the Ohioans took the ridge here in the Civil War and beat the Southerners and went off and won the war. And I said, won the war? Won the war? Well, yeah, honey. Yeah, the Union won the war. No, beat the Confederates, beat us. I'm 8 years old, beat us. After that, boy, I sang, save your Confederate money, boys, the South's going to rise again. I thought my father said, hey, we got rid of slavery and we saved the Union. It was okay. But I couldn't quite get over that. And in my elementary school, where my great aunt taught, there was a big mural on the wall. Two generals looking at each other, side by side on horses. Should have been Lee and Grant. It wasn't. It was Lee and Stonewall Jackson. And I was always Lee or Stonewall Jackson. I grew up that way the whole way. On a bus, 10 years old, put my quarter in, turned, faced the bus. Whoo, it was full. I'm 10 years old. It's full. Except for 2 seats right here. 1 seat unfull. It was all black. It was all colored. Colored. 10 years old, 1950. I knew the rules. That woman was supposed to get up and let me have both chairs. I stood there. I waited. She didn't get up. I looked at the white bus driver. I knew what he was going to say. Lady, get up and go back. She worked all day. She's supposed to go up and hold a step. And I'm 10. He didn't say anything. What I didn't know was, he knew who was paying. I put in a little farthing, essentially. These people paying his way. That's why he's a bus driver, because he's got riders. I looked, boy, I didn't like it. It started, she said something twice. She said, honey, I'll never forget, honey, it's all right. You can sit right here. Honey, you can sit right here. Boy, I sat down like this. I didn't move a muscle for 2 miles. Got off at McCallie School, wasn't black. Nothing had happened. Didn't go home and tell my parents. My life continued like that until 20 years of age. Lemoyne College, Memphis, Tennessee. Talked to a black kid. You saw it in there. Right. Told him about my uncles who fought in World War II. He said he had 2 uncles. My uncles, by gosh, they fought in World War II. And he said, well, mine did too. What'd yours fight for? Freedom and justice, America. Democracy. He said, so did mine. He said, by the way, you ever shop in downtown Memphis? I said, we're talking about World War II. He said, so am I. You ever shop downtown Memphis? Yeah. Did you stay all day? Yeah. Where'd you eat? Wars 5 and 10. Where'd you eat? My uncles and I are the ones who fought World War II for freedom and justice, democracy, pursuit of happiness. We get on a bus and we ride 2 miles out of town. Because we can't eat anywhere we spend our money. And at 20 years of age, hit me, rocked me. I got tight, I got embarrassed, I got ashamed, I'd been lied to. I'd been lied to by my father, who believed what his father believed, who'd believed what his father believed. I couldn't speak. He said, where'd you go to the bathroom? I said, I go anywhere I want to. He said, you know where we go to the bathroom? Get on that bus. I went to my dorm, Rhodes College, cried, sobbed for 3 hours, went over the next day to the dean of men who had gone to McCallie School with my father, said, this is crazy. Christian college, English, math, and we don't even know those people over there. Got out, dropped out, went to the Navy. Great experience for me. Tried to make friends with the black guys on the ship, couldn't make friends, they didn't want to make friends. I was too big and too southern. Came back, married my childhood sweetheart. We've been married 54 years. Was born and raised here. Came back to my father after finishing college, going to Harvard, getting my master's, teaching a couple years up there. Came back to my father in 1968, said, Dad, it is time to integrate McCallie. I'm talking about privilege. I didn't interview. I just walked into the headmaster's house and said, I want to teach. I said, but Dad, you got to integrate. He said, I can't integrate. Those kids can't do our work. I said, Dad, you don't know those kids. You don't know any black kids. He said, I can't do it. I went to Howard High School, all black. Great experience, terrific experience. 2 years of teaching English, 1 year as assistant principal because the judge, the federal judge said, you will, Chattanooga, you will put white assistants in the black schools and you will put black assistants in white schools. I got my first administrative job through affirmative action. I love affirmative action. I think it's great. One last story. 1968, I graduated from McCallie in 58. I go back to my 10-year reunion. I am anathema to my McCallie classmates. There may be 2 or 3 who are friendly to me, but the rest of them said, you're where? You're over at that in school teaching? You're not teaching in McCallie? You're over at that in school? I said, no. I mean, they were saying the word. I said, no, I'm over at the black school. They said, that's what we said. I said, that ain't what you said. At any rate, it was a rotten experience. The next week, I'm over with my faculty, my all-black faculty. There are 10 of us, but when we go out to a party out up on the lake, I'm the only white who goes. There are 50 black people. It's nighttime, we're having fun. And in front of everybody, one of the men who wants sort of to get my goat comes over to me and says, well, McCallie, how you feel up here at night with all these black people? And I looked at him and said, safe. They didn't know how to take that. I was safer there than in my own reunion. And that's how it's been since then. This is, my wife and I moved away for 41 years. I'm going to quit in a minute. My wife and I moved away 41 years, Chicago to get another degree, St. Louis to be a high school principal. Came back 5 years ago, coming home. Retired, I'm 77. Got here, went to my first meeting, venue, 150 black people and 2 white people. Next thing we went to, another venue, musical venue, 250 black people, 2 white people. I turned to my cousins and said, what's going on? They said, it hadn't gotten any better. We were getting better in the late 70s, early 80s, things were changing. Everything stopped. We don't get together anymore. I started asking some white friends, who are your black friends? Huh? Who are your good black friends? Friends? Yeah, black friends. I don't have any black friends. No black friends. And that's what we found. And we decided we'd do something about that. And that's what we decided to do. And we opened our home. We've had 25 of those meetings. Laquita and Jim came the other night. Just had 140 people come through. We've had 1,000 people through our home. 600 different people, black and white. And we sit and talk. And to a person, when white, and by the way, no religion, no politics, and I don't serve alcohol. I've got friends with 2 glasses of wine, they get cantankerous. I don't need cantankerous. So we talk, we make friends, and to a person, the white people go out and say, I needed that. But it's got to be intentional. If I don't give you any other word, and I'm quitting, it's intentional. It's intentional. You go out and you speak and you do it intentionally, else it isn't gonna be done.
Wow.
That's more than my share. Thanks.
No, that was good. Thank you.
You're up. You got to follow that.
Can I get Reverend Caswell in here
To follow that one?
share your story? Because I think what a lot of times where we miss the boat is we don't have a frame of reference, and we make assumptions, and we go on stereotypes, and we see people for who the media paints them out to be. And sometimes when you don't understand the frame of reference, you can make assumptions about people that could be dead wrong. Right. And so you've got a powerful story too. So if you would share your story of your upbringing, your childhood, your family structure and situation to the group, because I think the questions that will follow will help everybody in the room to understand your stories better as we work through the other questions.
Amen. I just want to say it's an honor to be here with all of you all. A truly honor to be here with you guys. And I heard so much about you, and to hear you say back there that LeMoyne On was the college that touched you. And knowing the impact of that African American school in our community is powerful. And so, but my story is totally pretty much the opposite side of this. Yet, while you was talking, I say this is that I'm 42, I'll be 42 in May, and it just hit me about a few weeks ago that I've been running from my ACEs and my adverse childhood experience up until now that I was an adult. And when I say that is that I grew up in the Dixie Home projects in the North Memphis area. Grew up 17 brothers and sisters, a pretty big family, but we grew up in extreme poverty. Back basically during the crack age is when I came in the 90s, and so crack hit our community real hard. My brother was caught up in it, became like the heavy drug dealer in the community, and so a lot of people basically looked up to him and to around our family. And so one of his young men who was with him got killed, who was my best friend, about my 14th birthday, and he was shot right in front of me. And basically to see him die on that street. A couple of weeks later, so we had another one of our friends, and I'm a 14, 15-year-old young man, seeing him, his brains blown out on the steps of our apartments. So many things that I saw, even and kind of, because I got a story to tell, but to have, because they knew that I was the one that kind of go around and collect the money in the neighborhood, that one day I was coming through this back alleyway, and this guy came up to me to rob us. And so when he did, he put the gun to my head, and he pulled the trigger after he snatched the money and stuff from me, and it didn't go off. But when he turned and everybody came around the corner chasing him, he turned and he started shooting, and it went off. And so, in growing up that way, it was like I had so much anger in me. You know, I was mad at the world. I was mad at anybody, and not knowing then that the adverse childhood experiences, the ACEs that I occurred, that had such an impact on me in school. Here I'm going in school, and the teachers asking me, "Well, where your pencil and paper?" And I'm staying up to 3, 4 o'clock in the morning trying to package up drugs and get that ready. And so my mind was far from getting an education. And so when it came time, I was 17 now, 2 grades behind, basically decided I'm not going to go back to school. I told my mother, I said, I'm going to go get a job, because my brother had got arrested, and the police officer said, who were then a rookie cop, become to be our director of our police department, who grew up across the yard from me. And he basically said, Charlie, if you don't do something different, you're going to end up like your brother. And my brother went on to do 10 years in prison. And so I started a car wash out the trunk of my car. And basically, 2 years later, went on to just building up my money, started a car dealership, and basically began to operate in that capacity. It wasn't until I was about 25, 30, going on 30 rather, that I decided to go back, when I met my beautiful wife here, to go back and get my GED. And so at the time, a car business, the economy started going pretty much down. And so I ended up as the executive director over the Community Development Corporation in our community. And so because of my trauma and because of my experience of growing up in that projects and seeing so many, that at this time they was closing down the projects in our community and started to integrate, redo Hope 6 projects. So the neighborhood I now live in, basically families began to move into that community, which is Fraser, which now we just formed the Northwest Shelby County Rotary Club. It's extreme poverty. You probably got 85% single family household. Some communities in there with families of 4 only got about $10,000 a year income, and so we had high infant mortality. Spike Lee wife did a show, a documentary about infant mortality, where our community, 38127, was that community that had worse than third world country when it came to babies dying before their 1 year birthday. And so my heart was really touched by that and me working with a lot of the parents in that community. So I started what is called a teen baby store, working with stakeholders in our community as at the time. And that baby store was set up that if these young teenage moms would come to us and they will go to the OBGYN, which was not in our community, but go to OBGYN, they dropped out of school, if they go back and get their GED or go back to high school, they was able to get points and use those points to come in that baby store and get diapers and car seats and baby beds and things like that. So that began a lot of the work that I began to do on the ground. So we've seen over the years when the mayor and others came on board to partner with us in our community, we went from 16.9 babies dying per 1,000 babies dying a year down to under 9%, 9.1 babies dying a year per 1,000 in that community. So we've seen a pretty good decrease in that, even though it was still higher than those in our white communities where you had 3% per 1,000 dying. Again, because of the extreme poverty, because of the fact when they moved, the families in this community where we were now didn't have a health clinic or anything like that. So we just felt that the only way we was going to bring about change, and we began to see that change, was through collective impact. It was us working together, churches coming together, working with the police department, the health department, and other entities, in which an initiative was formed at that time. We called it the 7P Community Collaboration. And that's where we began to work with the pastors, the police, the politicians, the parents, the principals, the proprietors and partners in our community, with a focus on communication, collaboration, and connecting with each other. We said we got to stop pointing the finger at each other and saying, this is what the pastors are not doing this, the parents are not doing that. We got to focus in on the issue, and the issue is our babies are dying, and it's something that's causing this. So the conversation in our community when we connected with Rotary, and I said the experience for me that changed my life too, is it just really in the past 2 years, we just started our Rotary Club and got our charter in March of last year. And it happened pretty quick, but it happened because of a relationship I had with an 80-year-old white man that I was a part of this program called the Criminal Juvenile Justice Program. And we spent 9 months together through Leadership Memphis. And this gentleman name is Roy Ray, who is the executive director over the Rotary Family Youth Initiative. And we was so kind of way they pardoned us up to sleep in the cabin together for 5 days in the woods. And he wouldn't let me go to sleep. Yeah. I wrote a book, How to Become More Visible, Vocal, and Valuable to Your Community, based around the work that I do. And he said every night reading that book, and he said, Charlie, now you got to tell me about how these pastors, how everybody began to work together. He said, because if we're going to help decrease juvenile recidivism, it's going to take this type of work. And so when I heard about what Rotary was doing around bringing people together to focus on this issue, and what Rotary did when it came to polio, and understanding that they saw that there was a need there, and then they set a goal to eradicate polio, and then they began to partner and collaborate with initiatives to get to the place that where we are now, to see 99% of that eradicated. I said, this is a task that can be done. A lot of people were saying, we can't get to 50% decrease in juvenile arrests, not in these communities. Well, I'm here to say, because of our collaboration and coming together with Rotary Family Youth Initiative, just over the past 2 years, in 2015, when I first began to really do a work collaborative, connecting with Rotary and some of the others, we went from 738 kids in that year being arrested for the top 10 incidents in our neighborhood, which you only had, out of that 730, about 10 of them being white, the others blacks. The next year we had 600 and something. Well, last year, because of the work that we're doing collectively with Rotary Family Youth Initiative, we only had 200 and some youth arrested in our community, a 78% decrease in that. Why? And the reason was because we started putting our differences aside. It was because we was willing to talk one with each other and then begin to ask the question, it's not what's wrong with them, it's what happened to them. It's what happened to us in our childhood that made us think the way that we did, that created that norm for us, that we didn't know the story. I didn't know Roy's story. I didn't know that he was there when 2 African Americans were hung in his community. But when we sat down and talked about it, and he told me about the lynchings that he was there to see, and then I can tell him about the things that I went through, then he knew the reason why I was acting the way that I was. Again, my life was survival. I was just looking at how to survive for my family, my children, how to survive. Now, being a pastor of a church, they elected me 2 years ago to be the pastor of the church where I am now, which is an 80-year church. But watch this here, the gentleman who was the pastor then, Reverend James E. Smith, for 40 years, he was one of the leaders who brought Dr. King to Memphis in 1968. He became the president of ASME, the sanitation worker, from 1969 to 1993. I watched the video that was in my office, Hills, where that night they beat them when they were asking him to get in the car to go over to the Lorraine Motel with Dr. King. He chose to march with the people. But today, because of the work we're doing with Rotary, I now ride the beat with the colonels when they was beating them 50 years ago. Right. And riding the beat with that colonel now in our community, we had an incident just not too long ago, and I'll come to a close, where a white officer shot a black man in our neighborhood. And now y'all understand what's going on around the country. So Black Lives Matter, everybody began to hit social media, and they was ready to come to our neighborhood. The colonel called me. He said, Charlie, can you get here right now? And I showed up that night, and then because of the work that we've been doing in our community, I had the respect of the people in that community. And I walked in the crowd, and I said, before y'all talk about burning down and starting a riot or whatever you're going to think about doing tonight, I want to ask the question, what did you see? What did you see? And I went around the corner. Everybody said something different. So I said, we're not going to do anything until we see the truth and the proof. They got cameras on there, and everything see. So I went on social media and said, don't show up in our neighborhoods. Let us, the stakeholders in our community, did it, and we had peace ever since. The truth came out that the officer was justified in the shooting because the boy had the gun, and they had it on tape. They were showing me the tape saying they planted the gun, but he's the same gun. I'm showing them, this is Facebook page, he got the gun in his hand. So again, being able to ask what happened and not what's wrong, I believe got us to the place to where we are now, starting that Rotary Club, seeing the impact that we is, and now our club is doing some great things because Rotary have became attractive to people on our who have joined us, like our colonel, who's now Rotarian, a judge who's an African American who just joined us as a Rotarian, and others are coming on board because they see that the work is attractive to our community to bring about change, and that's the impact that's being made.
Wow. All right, Gray, you're up, and then we got to do a rush through. I have 3 more questions for you guys, and you've hit a bunch of it, but I promised them they would get to submit questions, and we have about 22 minutes left.
But I'll be brief because my story is a little different. I grew up in a southern town, Winston-Salem. I was 20 minutes away from Greensboro. Does that resonate with folks, what happened in Greensboro? Well, I was a child during that time. I was a child whose mother didn't work outside the home but was very active in junior league. I had a father who was a manager in a local business as an engineer. I was in a private school that was predominantly white, but by the time I got to 7th grade, things were changing and that school integrated. And I would say that a lot of my formative opinions were because I was 6 feet tall in the 6th grade. And I got lots of attention for sports. And I spent lots of time in lots of different places with lots of different people. And in the end, it's about how you perform, not the color of your skin or any of that. So when I finished 9th grade at this private school, to go to the high school that my parents went to, I got bused across town for a year to a school where I was the white minority, 10%. And I'm sure if I hadn't had sports to lean on to meet people in that school as the new face, it was a tough time to be in that situation in the 70s. So finished and went on to college. You know, for me, college was never anything other than that's what you do. There wasn't a question about how did you find the money to do that or do you do that. It never occurred to me not to go to college. And I look back on that, and that was a product of the way I was brought up and the community that I was in. But my dad was a Rotarian, so I knew all about Rotary. And when I had the opportunity to join Rotary right out of college at 22, I did. And I was a club president at 24 in a small community in North Florida. And I think Rotary has given me an opportunity to get out of my comfort zone time after time after time after time. And I fortunately availed myself of that. My wife and I have moved all over the country professionally. I've been in multiple Rotary clubs, but this whole note of inclusion, it makes people very uncomfortable. When Rotary allowed women to become members of Rotary, I was a club president, and I went to my board and said, in this Rotary club, we had a senior female who came in and played piano every week. And she didn't have to pay for lunch. And we sang Rotary songs, and that was just kind of the norm for this club of all white men. Most were 20 to 30 years my senior. So I'm addressing the board, and I said, this has come down from Rotary National. We can now have women members. I'd like to propose that our pianist become the first honorary member of our club. And one of the more outspoken folks in the club that was on the board that everybody listened to said, the day you admit women to this club will be the last day that I'm a member of this club. And he said that, and it kind of laid out there with a pregnant pause, and I looked at him and I smiled and I said, we'll miss you. And we did bring her in the club, and that club today is about 50-50 men and women, and of course that person never left. You know, it was a very idle threat. In fact, when we made that change for inclusion, I think the club changed its act a lot because men behave differently when women are around. So when I moved to Memphis, and Memphis is in the news, all of you can pick up a paper any given day and see statistics, read stories, watch the news, hear what's going on in Memphis. We did a Rotary Peace Forum 4 years ago. And we'd been doing peace forums because that was part of what Rotary did for several years. But the district governor that was in place at that time wanted to get at this juvenile violence issue that we had in Memphis, thinking, of course, that that's something that was a typical problem in many Rotary communities. So we invited all kinds of people to come to this peace forum, and our idea was to help lift organizations that are already doing the yeoman's work in the community that didn't have a voice. And in that process, Charlie was known by several past district governors because of the work he was already doing in that community. And so we evolved to developing a 501c3 company called Rotary Family Youth Initiative. And our goal was to take it and have it be something that could replace Polio Plus. Rotary would need a program. Here was a need. Here was a national crisis going on in every community. Why not invest time to fix our community, put a roadmap together that other communities could use? So we started down that path. And there are lots of people that came out of the woodwork, or that we pulled up out of the woodwork to help us with that. One fella by the name of Bill Courtney. Bill Courtney is the person that went into inner city Manassas High School and took the high school that hadn't won a game in 3 years and made them a state champion in Memphis. The story, The Blind Side with Michael Orr, who played at University of at Mississippi. He actually went to the school, that school that he went to, my younger two children were attending that school, while my oldest son was at the McCallie school. So my story's a lot different, but because of Rotary, we get to put ourselves in situations where we can make a difference. It's not religious, it's not political, it's not male or female, it's all of us. And even if you look in the group today, this is a diverse group, but you know the folks in your club that become uncomfortable when you work these issues, and they've either got to get comfortable with it, or you've got to help them get comfortable with it, because that's where we're headed. Now, I say that, we have a club in our district today that's 100% white male, and it's in northern Mississippi. Our district governor that's the current district governor is a white female. And she had a great visit with this club. But when she came, the president of the club, addressing in front of the club, shared with her, we just wanted you to know that our board of directors met and we're still not ready to admit women. And she said, well, I understand, but you're 30 years too late. And at our district conference this year, the very first woman that joined Rotary in our district is a keynote speaker. How cool is that? Mm-hmm. So I mean, we're just scratching the surface. I think Charlie could sit here and go into great detail, but the things that are happening, forming a Rotary Club's great. One of Charlie's friends in Whitehaven, and Whitehaven is the area where Elvis Presley home is in Memphis, and many of y'all have visited that. If you haven't, you need to. Come to our district conference next year. It's at the Graceland Hotel, which is adjacent to Graceland. It's been open for about a year. 5-star hotel. There's lots to do in Memphis. But one of the principals in that area of the community, who knows Charlie really well, basically came to Rotary a year ago and said, I want a Rotary Club in my community doing the things that are happening in Charlie's community. He's a friend of mine, and I've seen the impact Rotary can have. Can we get a club going in our community if I put the legwork in? So this fall, he came back and said, I'm ready. So we're starting down that path. So it's just making a little change and being visible. I'm not somebody that gets very uncomfortable in many situations. I had the privilege of traveling all over the world. I think for most of us that have fear about the unknown, we know in our communities where not to go if you're concerned from a safety standpoint. But when you go to a new community, you don't know where not to go, or a new country, you don't know where not to go. You just have to be open to the possibilities to learn new things. And Rotary gives you that chance. Every time Rotary group gets together, you've got an opportunity to learn if you avail yourself of that. Because every one of us in this room are different. We all have a story, and we can all learn from each other. And so, really, I mean, Charlie and I have gotten to be really good friends. Charlie told me not long after we met, he said, you know, I was wrong about Rotary. And I said, how so? He said, well, I have my opinions about Rotary. And I said, well, you know, most people do. He said, you know, Rotary, most people think Rotary is where old white men go to lunch and take their fathers. And I said, we do that. That's true. I mean, my dad is 79, a former Rotarian. He goes to lunch with me occasionally. Not that I necessarily am old at 55, but the only way you break down those misconceptions, and they work both ways, is to get outside your comfort zone. And Rotary gives you the chance to do it if you choose to do it.
I got a question. Let me hop in here because we have 18 minutes.
Well, look who you invited.
I know. And I told Jim and I were like, you know, there's no way in the world we can do this right in 1 hour, but that's all they gave us. Yeah. So I need you to do this very succinctly for me in like 45 seconds or less each. Because each of you have really accomplished some extraordinary things and really building bridges and connecting people, even in unlikely places. And you guys have really set some great examples for us all to have some takeaways from. But I gotta know, it's not always a kumbaya moment for other people. So give us a little bit of how do you handle people who question your why, who question your motivations and intentions, who question whether you're selling out. How do you handle that?
Well, I tell you, I did get that in part, but for me, is the genuineness of my work. I just say this as a pastor. Jesus said, if you don't believe the words I say, believe the works that I do. I try not to talk a lot about what I'm going to do. I just do it. And so I had an incident while we was yet forming this club, we had a 2-year-old baby killed in our community in a drive-by shooting. So it called for Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, to come to Memphis. And when he did, the district attorney called me. She said, Charlie, they're coming. And the thing is that it's law and order. It's about locking some people up. And he need to hear your story. He need to hear what you all are doing in your community. And so other pastors, there was a few others asked, and they were like, I'm not going to see him because they already drew their conclusion that he's a racist. I don't want to see him. And I said this, I said, if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. So I showed up at the Federal Building. I showed up at the Federal Building, walked through the picket line, shook some hands because they was all around there, and many of them knew me again, and they respected that. They knew it, and I say this, and I just was the timing of God, that we had a storm back in May of Memphis, and basically 100 and some thousand lights went out in the community, and only God could have set it up in our city. And that I showed up at church that Sunday, and there was no lights at our church, so I told our church, I said, we going and feed the people, take these trees. We was pulling trees off the line, it went viral. Well, that week, we didn't have no lights for a whole week, but some of my project, Dixie Home, kicked in that we had plenty of days with no lights on that we cooked on the barbecue grill. So we cooked on the barbecue grill for 6 days and fed 6,000 people in our neighborhood, and it went all over the city. So people was coming from everywhere to help us. So when I walked through that picket line, the people remembered me from that day in our community. So they were like, man, go up there and let us know what's going on. And so I let Attorney General know, Jeff Sessions, gave him my book, and I talked about the adverse childhood experience. I talked about it to the standpoint of, I said, we got to look at what we're dealing with. I said from the 90s, you talked about law and order with crack cocaine. People were locked up, thrown in jail, taken away from their parents. The neglect of these children have felt like nobody was there. Their mama was on crack, their daddy was going to jail, grandmother was not accepting them. So they went and joined gangs. Now they was jumped into gangs and more than trauma on top of that. And so now these are our adults that's doing these drive-by shootings that never got that address. And now we come fast forward to where we are now, and you got families that's dealing with opium and heroin, and you're talking about a health issue. That was a health issue as well. So I said the unjust and the inequities we got to look at across the board. How do we deal with each other? And I said, I think that we're dealing with adverse childhood experience that was not addressed. And so therefore you got people acting out, not to just justify that, but in that he took it and he said, okay, what can we do? Instead of just locking them up, they gave some resources to then put another juvenile prosecutor in the Binghamton community like we were doing in the Fraser community. So where youth, when they're arrested, we're able to go in, instead of them taking them straight to juvenile court, they come to us and basically say, how can, I mean, that question is asked, what happened to you? And they allow us to get them treated for that trauma. So when they see that type of work, then they don't really fight against the fact that the diversity is happening. Because I said to them, and I'm sorry about this, but I said to them, I said, because of my friends on the right who have that influence with the district attorney and the prosecutor that we didn't have, we able to get this done. And so, but that's the type of relationship that came about. So they respect that. We was able to marry with our friends on the right, some whites in our community, and the blacks in our community coming together, and some changes are happening. So I apologize.
Good.
Well, the other piece to this is, from a law and order standpoint, the district attorney put prosecutors in the precinct house in the neighborhood, and the precinct colonel is a Rotarian. Think about that. The precinct colonel for the police is in this Rotary Club, and the prosecuting attorney is there. So rather than routing these juveniles into the adult system in downtown Memphis, which is horribly difficult, they're able on a one-to-one basis to work with trained counselors to understand what's happened to them, what's going on with them, what caused them to do this. And it's not taking them out of the system, it's taking them and understanding what's happening to them so that the system, so they don't become a statistic in the system. And it's working.
Do you have any takeaways in terms of how you deal with people who question why you're doing what you're doing?
I usually say, look at the data.
Look at the data.
I mean, I'm an engineer, I can't help it. I'm a data-driven person. Sometimes being data-driven drives people crazy. But they're not my statistics that we're quoting. They're the city of Memphis's statistics. And we can point to Rotary isn't the only reason that there's change.
Right.
But Rotary is contributing to the improvement in the statistics because of the work that the Rotary Club's doing, all the points of contact that group in Rotary has. It's making a real difference. And we still have people that were involved in forming this club in our district that are still actively involved, regularly attending meetings, interacting. The assistant governor for that part of our district is really the key contact in our district that helped form the club.
Dr. McCallie?
I want to tell this quickly if I can. You know what? It's day by day doing the job. That's what it is. I went over to Howard School, and one of the female teachers said to me, "When you going to write your book?" She knew why I was there. I was a white guy there to write my book. I wasn't there to write my book. I didn't know why I was there. She didn't have any idea why I was there. I was there because my father wouldn't integrate McCallie School, and that was wrong, and I wasn't going to stay there. So I went to Howard. Terrific experience, and I had to prove myself every day. I'm going to give you one example. Sometimes, though, you are tested, and you've got to decide what you're going to do. First year, end of the year, May, we don't have cell phones at that time. I get a call, kid runs in my office, said, Mr. McCallie, it's at the end of school day, 3:15. Said, your best friend, Moses Freeman, the teacher, black man who had brought me into Howard, put his arms around me, literally and figuratively, said, he's called you, he needs you. And I ran down, got on the phone. He said, Franklin, we're having a march. So-and-so high school, the principal over at that school is being mean to, it's a largely white school, they're being mean to and unjust to black kids. We're having a march, we need more white people. I said, what? Well, the principal at that school was my father's best friend in the public schools. My gosh, we're marching against him. Oh, that's good. He said, we need more white people. Okay, we need more white people. Where are you? Over at Erlanger Hospital. I went over to Erlanger Hospital. 96 black people. Not a single white person in the group. Moses waiting for me at the end. I said, Moses, you said you need more white people. He said, I do. I said, Moses, you need one white person. He said, that's more white people. Now I have a decision. Do I support the black kids at the other school with the best friend of my father, or do I say, Moses, I'm going to pull out? I knew what I had to do. I got in the march. We marched down to City Hall. H.H. Battle, for whom Battle Academy is now. It's a school right over here. Great pastor, gave a Martin Luther King Day speech. He was great. We got to have justice for our kids and so on. Got to the end, and the leader said, and now we're going to have young brother so-and-so talk. I knew young brother so-and-so, and I knew that talk wasn't going to go anywhere at all. Boy, I got behind Moses. I saw the photographer, and I scratched in, got behind Moses. He's 5'8", and I'm 6'5". I couldn't get behind Moses. And this guy started talking, and he said the roughest, we're gonna crush the mayor's neck. Now, nothing, there was no riot out of this march. There wasn't. But it was wrong. Next day, I'm looking I get up early, look at the paper. What did I see? Front page, blacks march against so-and-so high school. I'm not saying that high school on purpose. And then I open it up, and there are two long columns, and it gives every word that everybody said, the good talking and the bad talking. And I thought, oh, geez, the picture, you can barely tell I'm in there with Moses, so it's okay. And I go down to the end, and I'm so glad I'm not in until it gets the last paragraph. It said there was one white marcher, Franklin McCallie, a teacher at Howard High School, and the phone rings. 6 o'clock in the morning, the phone rings. And the man on the other end doesn't say, hello, son, how are you doing? He doesn't say, just so good to talk to you. He says, son, you have ruined yourself. It is all over. It is done for you. You might as well leave town. And this is my father. Boy, it was a terrible time for me. But I'd done the right thing, and I knew it. And black people knew I'd done it, and the word went out and said, that man stood with us when it was the wrong time for him. I made the right decision. It was the right thing for me to do. That's the stand I was trying to make. We all listen, I could give you dozens, some little, some big. And when you know where you are, and when you know what you got to do, and when you know what you stand, and when you know what you've said, McCallie School, honor, truth, duty. That's what our motto was in my own father's school. Honor, truth, duty. That's what I had to do. And that's what I did. And if you do that, regardless of the slings and arrows you're going to get, and you're going to get them from both black, I get it still from both black and white. What are you really up to? What am I really up to? I'm up to truth and justice and fairness for black and white and male and female for all Americans. That's what I'm up to. That's what you do.
All right. Good. Okay, so in closing comments, before we get to the two questions, what advice, because apparently there are people who are thinking about this beyond the people on this stage, because this room is full. So what advice would you give to Rotary clubs who are really working to improve in this area with building bridges and building communities and building relationships across racial lines, across ethnic groups, across differences in religion, all those types of things that are covered under the big umbrella of diversity? What few words would you leave with them as they begin to think about this?
I can be short on this one. Step out. Step out across the color line. You want to bring other people in? Step out and go. You want to speak? Speak to them. You got a black member, you got a female member, you got a whatever member. Speak to them. Go out of your way. Speak to them. Intentionally speak to them. Bring them in. Don't sit back and say, I wonder if they'll be friends. I wonder if Speak to them. Go out of your way and bring them in.
I think long are gone the days where we go out and recruit people for Rotary. You heard the numbers this morning if you were in the session with Mark Maloney. In the last 10 years, we brought 1.2 million members to Rotary. And we're at the same place 10 years later that we were with 1.2 million members. So that means we've lost that many members in that same 10-year period. So part of it for me is we need to be doing things that attract people to Rotary. And if your club doesn't have programs that you get people interested in, it's not going to work. We have one club in the Memphis community that stopped inviting people to lunch. They don't do that anymore. They invite them to their projects. They get to meet everybody in the club, they get to participate in a project, they get to do something that's hands-on that they know is adding value. And then once they've seen the things going on in Rotary, why don't you come have lunch with us? And they're pretty successful with that approach. The Memphis Club, 9 months ago, moved our club meeting from the University Club, which is for University of Memphis. We now meet at Claiborne Temple. And if that name's not familiar with you, Claiborne Temple is downtown across from the FedEx Forum where the Grizzlies play. And it was a church built by Second Presbyterian Church that was given to a black community church that was starting in Memphis called Kojic, and then 20 years ago was abandoned. Now it just happens to be the same church where Martin Luther King's famous speeches were made before the sanitation strike that occurred in Memphis occurred. So the Memphis Rotary Club moved there to be active in downtown, to be intentional about our message of inclusion, and we're coming up on what Memphis is calling MLK 50, which is a celebration of the results over the last 50 years since Martin Luther King was assassinated. So we're not commemorating his assassination, we're looking with a real sharp lens at the things that have changed, and there's more work that needs to be done, but because Rotary has put themselves in the middle of that, the demographics of our club have really changed a lot. It's really interesting to step back. When I joined the club, we were 450 members. Now we're 180. And that 180, several of the last couple of years, we've lost as many as 36 people from death. So we've dropped our age profile almost 15 years average over the last 6 or 8 years. So you got to be intentional. You've got to get out of your comfort zone. And if somebody doesn't look like you, they might be a great Rotarian. But once you get them to come to Rotary and have them interest, you can't turn loose. All of us have had somebody that cared enough about us to invite us to come to Rotary. Every single one of us. So don't you know one person that you care enough about to invite? One person. If we all did that, we'd double. Think about that. One person.
Reverend Caswell, any closing comments?
I'm a bit short. Intentional.
I don't believe y'all.
I'm going to say be intentional, and again, it's not what's wrong, it's what happened. And using that as asking the question, what happened? And when you look at what happened in our community, it went from 80% home ownership to down to almost 50-50 when they integrated that. So a lot of people didn't want to come into Rotary clubs, into their community. Why? Because you had so much poverty. But for Rotary to say, okay, Northeast clubs, and we'll sponsor this club to come in. So they sponsor our club with the leaders that was there. We called those leaders, identify a trailblazer in the community you may not want to go into, and connect with them, sponsor them, let them begin to pull those leaders in together and work with them. And we just had an awesome gala together, the Northeast Club, the Northwest Club, honoring heroes in our community, and we all did it together by being intentional.
Okay. So I have one question here. Reverend McCallie, how can one get your book? I mean, Reverend Caswell, I'm sorry.
Well, it is on Amazon, How to Become More Visible, Vocal, and Valuable to Your Community, Charlie Caswell on Amazon. So.
Okay. All right, I have another question here. How do we still sanction clubs that refuse membership to women or people of color? And I don't know that that's necessarily, but you may have some insight.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting dilemma. I am the district governor-elect for my district. So the fact that I know that story for my current district governor, I went and asked some other district governor-elects, and I had a whole variety of answers from ignore them to revoke their charter. Think about that. Go in and say, if y'all aren't going to change, you're not acting like a Rotary Club, we're going to yank your charter. Okay, well, the truth is somewhere in the middle. So my plan is when I go visit that club, I know somebody that is a key business owner in that community who's a woman, and she'll be my guest when I visit that club as a district governor next year, starting in July. And if that's not successful, we may have 2 Rotary clubs in that small community. Think about that. Think about that as a conflict.
On your tables, you have a little half sheet of paper. It's got red light. I didn't know whether this was going to make it, this video, but there's another video. If you look on your little phone and pull it up from Google, it's 7 minutes long. It's from WTCI. TCI, it's our PBS in Chattanooga, and you may want to see it. It was 7 minutes on our program, and I got to tell you one last thing. So, on a particular day, I read in the paper that about a year later than that last time I'd read in the paper. I read in the paper, it said Downtown Kiwanis Club has taken the first black member. I was so excited because the Kiwanis Club or the Rotary Club, it happened to be the Kiwanis Club. If the businessmen had taken the first black member in 1969, then in fact something was going to happen. Something big was going to happen, and we were going to have some help. I knew who would have done it. He was an old McCallie graduate. I went down. He was vice president of the bank. He was a great friend of my father. I was friends with his kids. I found him in the parking lot. I put my hand out. Marion Gaston. I said, Mr. Gaston, congratulations. He said, what for, son? I said, Mr. Gaston, you're the only man I know in Chattanooga who could have gotten those 100 white men to take that first black member. And he looked at me and he said, son, didn't you know? I'm sorry. Did you know that was your father? I started crying. I got in my car, went to McCallie School. My father saw me crying. He started crying. We hugged. He whispered in my ear, son, I've been wrong about black people all my life. He was 60 years of age. He said, next year, Board of Trustees and I integrate McCallie School. He said, you and your brothers, your sister, your cousin, y'all affected me. You made me think. It was one of the great days of my life. And I still have trouble.
Well, in closing comments, so now you see why they're here today. And I can't think of 3 more worthy people for us to begin having this conversation in Mid-South Pets, representing Kentucky, Alabama, Tennessee. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you so much. I feel so badly that we had you on skates the whole time, but I wanted them to experience some of what I've come to know and learn about you all. And so in closing comments, I gotta tell you, complacency is the antithesis of progress. If you're not growing, you are dying. That's the reality. We have to be relevant as an organization or we'll find ourselves extinct at some point. We are competing with everything people spend time and money on. And so millennials are our largest living generation, and the projections are incredible. So if we don't find a way to engage with young people, we're in trouble. Women make up 47% of the U.S. labor force. If we don't find a way to engage women, we're in trouble. By 2050, minorities will be the majority. If we don't get comfortable with that, we're in trouble. We have 5 generations of people working in the workplace today. If you don't know how that impacts the bottom line, then you're in trouble. The purchasing power, the LGBTQ community is $1 trillion. If you don't know how to engage with LGBT communities, you're in trouble. Hispanics have a spending power of $1.4 trillion. So my final comments, 2 things, 2 quotes I want to leave you with. One of which my pastor, the Bishop Joseph Warren Walker III in Nashville, always says, if you only have 2 teeth, they're better together. And I'd like to leave a more scholarly quote with you. A single candle can light thousands of other candles without diminishing the light of the original candle. So the question I want to leave for you today to ponder over the course of the next couple days before you go back to your homes, communities, and clubs, is your club lighting candles or blowing them out? Thank you for being with us today.
That was good. Hey, I want to get a picture. That's cool. My wife, hey, take a picture. I want to get a picture with you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
We got to do